Hello and welcome to today's episode of Totally Abstracted. My name is Michelle and there's something I want to talk about today that feels important, even though I don't fully understand it yet. It's one of those conversations where I'm thinking out loud, trying to articulate something that's still forming, still finding its shape, I guess, in real time. At the moment, I'm making work without having a clear explanation for it. I don't know where it's leading. I don't know how it fits into the bigger picture of what I've made before. And I don't have a neat artist statement prepared or a cohesive body of work to point to. And I guess I'm deliberately not trying to tidy that up too quickly. For a long time, I've been known for abstract landscapes, and I still love them. I love the quietness they hold, the way they create atmospheric space, the sense of being somewhere vast and unknowable. But recently I felt pulled in a different direction. Not away from what I've done before exactly, but deeper into something else. Something I didn't see coming to this extent. I'm finding myself very drawn to faces, to figures, to something more direct and more confronting. And I don't yet have the language for why. At first, I tried to stay within familiar territory. I started adding objects to my landscapes, buildings, bridges, constructed forms, thinking maybe that would satisfy whatever was pulling at me. And it was interesting, it added a new dimension, but it wasn't enough. There was still something missing, something those structures just couldn't hold. I needed more. I needed faces. I needed the human presence, the gaze, the vulnerability and directness that comes with depicting a person. So that's when things started to shift in a way I couldn't ignore. This is that uncomfortable, exciting phase when the work arrives before the explanation, where you're making things that feel urgent and necessary, but you can't quite articulate why yet. You just know they need to exist. I think we're often encouraged, especially in creative industries, especially once you have any kind of visibility, to understand our work as we're making it, to know the theme, the intention, the meaning, to be able to speak confidently about what we're doing and why. There's an expectation of clarity, of being able to contextualize your practice in real time. But some of the most honest work I've made has come from not knowing, from just following a sense of charge or tension or curiosity and trusting that it's enough for now, trusting that the understanding will arrive when it's ready. So right now I'm in an experimental season, and in many ways a private one. I'm not documenting everything, and I'm not teaching from it. I'm not even sharing much of it publicly, though I have shared some photos on Instagram and some YouTube shorts. I'm mostly letting the work just exist in my studio, where it doesn't have to perform or explain itself yet. I'm listening to what it's asking of me, rather than trying to immediately translate it into content or narrative. And that's a strange thing to do once you've built any sort of audience. There's a pressure, I think, sometimes internal and sometimes external, to stay legible, to keep producing the thing people recognise, to remain consistent with what you've been known for. But art doesn't always move in neat, outward-facing ways. Sometimes it turns inward first, and sometimes it needs privacy before it can be public, and sometimes it needs to be messy and incomplete and confusing before it can become something you stand behind and name. So what I'm making at the moment feels closer to the nervous system, less about atmosphere, more about presence, less about creating something beautiful to look at, more about creating something that looks back, something that holds a gaze, that challenges the viewer, that asks something of the person standing in front of it. For one of my paintings, for my husband, that was too much. He was deeply uncomfortable looking at one of my faces. He's never had that response to one of my landscapes, and this was interesting. It actually made me want to explore more while promising to keep that particular painting in my studio. This shift in subject and experience matters. even if I don't yet know what it means, even if I can't fully articulate why it feels so necessary right now. And I don't think this is about changing identity as an artist. It's not about abandoning what came before or declaring some dramatic reinvention. It's about allowing identity to stay porous, to let curiosity lead without needing to justify it straight away. To trust that the threads connecting everything will become visible eventually, but that it doesn't need to be visible right now, not to anyone else, and maybe not even to me yet. There's something deeply vulnerable about admitting you're in this phase, though. I feel it right now as I record this. I'm saying I'm making things and I don't fully know why. It can feel like a lack of professionalism, like you're not taking your work seriously. But I actually think the opposite is true. I think it takes courage to follow an instinct before you have the words for it, to make work that doesn't slot neatly into your existing narrative, to allow yourself to be uncertain while still showing up to the studio every day. If you're listening and you're in a similar place, making work that doesn't fit your usual patterns, or doesn't feel shareable yet, or doesn't make sense to you, I want to say this: you're not lost, you're early. You're in the creative chaos that comes before clarity. You're in the part of the process that no one really talks about because it's harder to photograph, harder to package, harder to turn into a tidy before and after story. But this is where the real work happens. This is where you discover what you didn't know you needed to say. Maybe you're a writer who's always written fiction, but suddenly you can't stop writing essays about your own life. Maybe you're a photographer who's built a following for portraits, but you keep coming back to photographing empty rooms. Maybe you're a musician who's known for one sound, but you're secretly experimenting with something completely different in your headphones late at night. Maybe you've always worked in colour, and now all you want to do is work in black and white. Or you've always worked small, and suddenly you need to scale. Whatever it is, there's often this fear that the shift means you were doing it wrong before, or that you're betraying the people who connected with your earlier work, or that you're being flaky, uncommitted, unable to stay in your lane. But creative evolution isn't betrayal, it's honesty. It's paying attention to what's alive in you right now, rather than what was alive in you 2 years ago. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for your curiosity. You don't need to justify why something's calling to you. You don't need to have a fully formed thesis before you're allowed to explore. The exploration is the work. The not knowing is part of the process, not a problem to solve. I think one of the hardest things about being a creative person in the age of social media is that there's this pressure to narrate everything as it happens, to document the journey, to bring people along, to turn every experiment into content. I do it myself, and then I get annoyed at myself for doing it. Some phases of creative work are like seeds underground. They need darkness, they need privacy, they need time to germinate before they're ready to break the surface. And if you're constantly digging them up to check on them, to photograph them, to explain them, you might stop them from growing into what they're meant to become. So if you're in a phase where you're making things you're not ready to show, that's not a problem. That's exactly as it should be. If you're experimenting with something that doesn't fit your brand or your usual aesthetic, good. Let it not fit. If you feel pulled towards something that you can't articulate why, follow the pull. The articulation will come, or maybe it won't, and the work will speak for itself. And if people ask what you're working on and you don't have a neat answer, that's okay too. You can say, I'm in an experimental phase, or I'm following something, but I don't know where it's going yet. You can say, I'm making things I don't fully understand and I'm trusting that's enough for now. These are complete answers. They're honest answers. They honour where you actually are rather than where you think you should be. The artists whose work continues to surprise us, who stay vital and alive across decades, they're not the ones who found their signature style at an early age and repeated it forever. They're the ones who stayed curious, who allowed themselves to not know, who protected their right to evolve even when evolution felt risky or uncertain. You're allowed to be in transition without calling it a transition. You're allowed to make work that contradicts your previous work. You're allowed to be interested in something new without having to disavow everything that came before. Your creative practice can hold multitudes. It can hold contradiction, and it can hold the not yet resolved. Some work needs to be made before it can be named, before it can be explained, and before it can be shown. It needs time to breathe in private. It needs to be bad first. It needs to surprise you. It needs to sit quietly in the corner of your studio while you figure out what it's trying to tell you. And sometimes the most important thing you can do as an artist is protect that phase, to let yourself make without commentary, to turn down the volume on all the voices, internal and external, that want you to have figured it out already. To trust that understanding will catch up later, and that when it does, it will be truer because you gave the work room to unfold on its own terms. So for now, I'm letting myself make what I don't understand. I'm following faces when I've spent years following horizons. I'm sitting with the discomfort of not having answers, and that feels like exactly where I'm meant to be. I think sometimes the bravest thing you could do is trust the work before you trust the explanation. Thank you for listening today. As always, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep things totally abstracted.